What happened to Luke Skywalker? After being tempted to kill his nephew Ben, the great Luke Skywalker goes into hiding and stays on some random island. Fans have been split on the movie, and some of the biggest issues people have come from the handling of this character. Everyone seems to agree that Mark Hamill gave a strong performance, and a lot of people found the chemistry between him and Daisy Ridley to be enough for a solid master-student relationship. Maybe we would get something like Yoda and Luke. I mean, that's held up for years. At the end of The Force Awakens, a movie built around the finding of Luke Skywalker, Rey finally finds the old bearded bastard and brings him back his blue lightsaber. We end on what seems to be a very overwhelmed and broken Luke. This is a dramatic moment, a lot being said with Mark Hamill's facial acting. For 2 years, fans waited for the return of the OG. The trailers hinted at a darker Luke who was saying the Jedi have to end, and it was clear director Rian Johnson was going to take Luke in new directions. Well, what went from skeptical excitement turned into what felt like betrayal. Not only did we not get a lot of training with Luke and Rey, but we hardly got any Luke at all. Was this some cruel joke? It had to be. So why doesn't it work? Well, for starters, the lack of backstory regarding the First Order and the Snoke stuff, all the stuff with Snoke, where he came from, why is he so powerful, how is he connected to all this, how did he rise in power so quickly, takes a lot of the emotional weight out of the scenes with Luke. We find a broken man who's clearly upset about the choices he made in life, the things he discovered about himself and the world in his older years. There's no Luke and Rey sitting around a fire telling stories to each other, with Luke going into when Snoke first showed up and how he started training new Jedi to fight him. Maybe Luke knew that Ben was the key to defeating Snoke, but something happened between the two of them and Luke can't go into it. The film kind of does this. We get somewhat of a mystery concerning what happened between him and Luke. Rey doesn't seem to trust Luke for a small portion of the movie, and Kylo tells her Luke is lying about what happened between them. This all plays out in a very, what I found, lame homage to Kurosawa's Rashomon, even though some people on Collider and other critics just praise it for that. The truth is somewhere in the middle, right? Luke went to light his saber for just a second, but then changed his mind. Kylo had already woken up and saw Luke was standing there, his uncle, ready to kill. Kylo grabs his saber in defense, and we have an Akira moment. Luke wakes up and Kylo is left with several students. The issue here is that because we know so little about the galaxy during these events, the flashbacks feel hollow and out of place. Rian Johnson keeping it all in a small tent doesn't help either. What's this supposed to feel like? Some big, powerful, dramatic sequence? It's kind of goofy, with Luke's hair being dyed and the simplistic nature of the misunderstanding, how childlike Kylo looks, even if that's intentional. I mean, for a sequence that's supposed to be the entire, in a lot of ways, the one of the big emotional moments of this new saga, I found it an embarrassing sequence. All three of those flashbacks, I thought they were embarrassing both visually and in the storytelling. Somehow in 30 years, Luke Skywalker, the man who was willing to die in order to save his father, a man who killed children, this is a man who was a child killer, is now going into a tent to destroy the son of his sister and best friend? Luke says this is because he saw darkness in Kylo. And maybe you can take that as Luke seeing the darkness in himself. Maybe killing Kylo would get rid of the parts of himself that he's not too happy with. It's hard to buy this because Luke is making such a dramatic shift. The dramatic shift isn't set up properly. All we really get are disconnected flashbacks and things that are only half explained to us. Instead of the dialogue between Rey and Luke giving us a lot of information on those 30 years between films, we get generic Force babble and Luke refusing to do anything for a good chunk of the movie. From the moment with him tossing the lightsaber, it doesn't even really work. That moment, the first moment with Luke of him throwing the lightsaber over his shoulder, really doesn't work. Despite it being kind of funny at first, you know, when you see Luke's face at the end of Force Awakens, it comes across as a very serious moment. And there's a sense he knows a lot more than Rey is prepared for. That perhaps he is already aware that Han is dead, and seeing that lightsaber, and knowing this whole history. Him just throwing it away is there for a joke, and for Johnson to make his point. This movie isn't going to be what you want it to be. It's here to subvert your expectations and deconstruct Star Wars and its classic characters. This isn't about heroes or villains. No, this movie is more gray and morally complex. Your heroes can fail, and perhaps you shouldn't put so much importance into the old ways, or maybe the old ways of Star Wars. The point could be handled in several ways, but Johnson choosing the lightsaber is an outright aggressive move and sets the tone for what's coming. Almost every scene with Luke is set up in a way that feels like you're about to get something really cool, only to go in another direction you didn't see coming. The entire film does this, of course. Even in the scenes that feel very similar to both Empire and Return of the Jedi, Johnson tries to use that against you in hopes to shock. If you're going to do this, you have to make sure what you put in there is good enough to make the argument that giving us a more traditional Luke wouldn't have been better. Last Jedi fails at this miserably. The Luke scenes lack momentum, have silly comedy such as Luke milking a random creature, drinking this milk, and then making a stupid face. We get very little of the Force or Luke teaching Rey. Most of the talk about how the Force works is just stuff we have heard before. Rey is seeing a dark butthole on the island. Luke is scared that she went straight to the dark side, a power he hasn't seen since Ben. We only get the green lightsaber for the flashback scenes. When Luke shows up at the end, he is using the blue lightsaber and looks like a younger version of himself, because he's projecting himself across the galaxy. Now, the theories behind him using the blue saber for his Force projection is that he did it for Leia, because that's how she last saw him. It's symbolic for Ben's character, or is Luke now accepting the lightsaber he tossed away at the beginning of the movie? Luke Matrix dodges a swing from Kylo and then sort of kind of Obi-Wan Kenobi's. Because the movie spends so much time on the Canto Bight subplot, we lose a lot of the really valuable time between Luke and Rey. For me, I think one of the biggest mistakes in the movie is its dramatic focus was not making this relationship the heart of the movie. Johnson seems more interested in this Reylo thing, and while that is kind of interesting, I couldn't help but find it odd that Rey so quickly became friendly with Ben. She was ready to kill him just days before, actually hours before. The timeline really doesn't match up with this movie. Instead of an organic time jump, which would explain a lot about where Rey's at right now and why the First Order is about to destroy the Resistance, this takes place immediately after Force Awakens because of her handing the lightsaber. It's a really bad idea. It hurt Johnson's movie to have this go on right after the events of Force Awakens. That's the biggest mistake in this movie. Because Luke had 2 years of training in between New Hope and Empire, the beginning of Empire where he's kind of using the Force a little bit more with his lightsaber and stuff, you can accept it. And then he goes to train with Yoda and then gets his butt kicked by Darth Vader who's just toying with him. It all feels very natural and they don't overdo the stuff with the Force. Rey is OP in Force Awakens. She doesn't need Luke's training. So yeah, she was ready to kill him, and Rey has been shown as someone that doesn't mind killing or getting her hands dirty. Rey has killed several people in these movies. I'm not saying Luke didn't kill people, but Rey's a little bit more cold-blooded. She also doesn't seem to be the type to trust someone easily. I mean, she doesn't trust Luke. She doesn't trust Finn right away. She doesn't trust really anyone right away except like Han because he's a legend and all that stuff. But man, it doesn't take much for Kylo to convince her that Luke's not telling her the truth. Luke Skywalker was a naive and hopeful young man, so it was easy to buy him as someone who would go to Cloud City to save his friends and face Vader, or trying to save his father despite it possibly leading him to the dark side himself. Rey hasn't shown herself to be this kind of character, and it just seems idiotic of her to travel to Snoke's ship. I know that she has seen a vision of Kylo turning good, but why is she so emotionally invested? Her and Kylo have like 3 moments together, and then it's a YA romance, because she saw him shirtless and she wants to join forces. Anyway, back to Luke. Luke talks about the Jedi being hypocrites, and this is certainly true if we go off the prequels and some minor events in the original trilogy. We don't learn anything that new about the Force. Much of what we get is just rehashed elements from Empire Strikes Back, done in a less complex way. The moments that Luke feel the most like his old self are the brief scenes with Chewie and R2-D2. It's in those scenes that Hamill seems his happiest. The scene between Luke and Leia is also very good. The Hans Dice thing doesn't really work for me, but it was still a sweet moment. It's widely known now that Hamill disagreed with a lot of Johnson's choices, and you can see why. This Luke has pulled a 180 from the Luke we last saw in Jedi. There's really no solid backstory for it. Hamill, like a lot of us, feels cheated by the trio not getting any scenes together, and this depressing, just utterly depressing conclusion to their story, this nihilistic, hopeless ending to the original trio and what they went through against the Empire. Luke asks where Han is, and then we cut to something else. When I first saw the movie, I thought when we came back, Luke would be talking about Han Solo and share a moment with Rey. See, but we never hear about Han again. In fact, it's like Han's death didn't really impact Luke much at all. Why not use Han's death as a way to have the two characters bond? Or use that death to explain why Luke is being so hard on Rey. He's trying to deal with the loss of his best friend to his former student. I mean, after hearing this news, maybe he immediately just is like, whoa, get away from me, I don't know how to handle this. But it's only brought up once, and then there's the moment with Leia. Sure, Rian Johnson tries to get it across in a symbolic way, but wouldn't it have been better just to see Luke actually feel down that his friend was dead? I mean, all we get is, where's Han? It just doesn't feel like enough. For me, at least. Rey and Luke have a fight scene that almost works. It's a bit silly Rey even attacks Luke because her boyfriend has convinced her that her new stepdaddy's a big jerk. The reason it almost works, though, is because Rey first attacks Luke and he dodges it like some Kill Bill stuff. This is a nice moment to show Luke's power and how easy things are for him with the Force now. It's like she can't even touch him, it's like nothing. But no, Rey beats him and then grabs a lightsaber and holds it to him as he is hovering slightly above the ground. I guess you could say Snoke is causing this because he linked the minds of Kylo and Rey, or whatever, or something like that. They don't fully explain that. Snoke just says, I let it happen. But Snoke gets really dumb later when he can't see what's coming when it's so obvious and being spelt out for him, right? Well, that's for another video. We'll talk about Snoke later. Alright. It's like the character isn't there anymore. This is some new character that is being used in a specific way for this trilogy. I could go with that on some level, but the movie being so overtly connected to the original trilogy makes this hard to do. So much of what makes us invested in the current events of this series are because of the previous films, because of the original trilogy. So it just comes off as weird to see Luke act this stupid, to see Leia be this bad of a military leader, to see Han be this, well, just straight up goofy, and I don't know, like he doesn't really care. Luke has no agency, and it isn't very consistent. He says he will give Rey 3 lessons, and this is really 1.5 lessons. I thought he would get some Karate Kid type situation here, with Luke having Rey do fishing and daily tasks and give her some chores that feel like a waste of her time. Subtly, Luke is training Rey and teaches her valuable lessons. She doesn't realize this until Luke connects the dots for her in that Mr. Miyagi moment. Maybe we even get a montage? I don't think a montage would have been cheesy. The only issue is that it wouldn't work well with the timeline of the movie because of the events happening with the First Order chasing the Resistance. So there's a clock. This just means the training is cut short. Now Empire didn't handle this perfectly either, alright? The Empire Strikes Back has some timeline issues, especially with Han and Leia. The time between Han and Leia running and Luke training doesn't feel smooth in every scene, and it's not totally cohesive. Luke doesn't get a lot of time to train either, but he learns a lot and does a lot in those short scenes. Yoda is screwing with him at the start of the scene, he's being goofy, but it's just him just testing Luke, trying to see what he's doing, what he's looking for, what's going on. But soon he's on Luke's side. Alright, he gets on Luke's side immediately, and then he's on his back, and we see Luke doing some really cool stuff like flips and stuff. So it's like, okay, Luke is getting, more in tune with the Force. It's just little stuff like that works. You can buy that Luke is gradually getting better. Yoda shows him how powerful the Force can be and that size doesn't matter. Size matters not! The X-Wing rising from the swamp is one of the great sequences of Star Wars in the way that it's cut, the way that the music is used, and the way that it shows you what the Force really is. And it makes Yoda feel so wise and mystical, and the Force this grand, unlimited thing. We follow Luke into the woods to face his demons, seeing his face inside the mask of Darth Vader. Luke asks Yoda very direct questions, like, is the dark side stronger? And Yoda gives very direct answers, like, no. There's really no nonsense in this stuff. It's very good writing because we get a lot of information and the screenwriters aren't trying to be clever. Lawrence Kasdan and the other screenwriters knew that you need to give the audience just enough information, and what you leave hanging makes the film more interesting. Last Jedi tries to give you ultimately nothing, is how I felt about it. You really don't get much from the Rey stuff, except for a lot of subtext and stuff that keeps tying into the themes of the movie, instead of a story with an actual character arc. Rey really doesn't have much of a character in this movie. She didn't have a character in Force Awakens either, but she had at least an idea of a character or a story arc. Now she has nothing. A lot of the big moments for Rey come from Kylo Force Skyping her, and Snoke wanting this to happen. So Luke actually doesn't do much for Rey. Even her going into the butthole isn't something he is super involved with. You start to wonder why we're even seeing these two characters together. They never bond, and you never get a sense that Luke actually knows anything useful. I mean, what does he have to teach Rey? She knows everything. Yoda shows up in a confusing scene, still acting like the goofy Yoda from the early part of The Empire Strikes Back. But when Yoda did that in Empire, he was just testing Luke. That wasn't his actual personality, or at least it never came across that way to me, because after that opening, Yoda acts like a serious master character throughout the rest of the movie, and the beginning of Return of the Jedi. When he's dying, it's not that goofy, and in the prequels, he's not really goofy. And these films acknowledge the prequels' existence, so why is Yoda a big old goofball now? I don't know. I really don't know why Puppet Yoda was goofy, and people go, oh, it was like the Yoda in Empire. That's like, that wasn't Yoda's personality in Empire. Did everyone forget Star Wars? It's like how George Lucas forgot the original trilogy when he wrote the prequels. How did Kathleen Kennedy and everyone involved with this not notice basic continuity? Just very basic continuity. I mean, simple stuff that anyone could stay consistent with. So we could have gotten Luke being evil and the plot twist that he actually did try to kill Kylo. Not that he thought about it for a second and changed his mind. Or we could have seen Rey slowly bring out the Luke that we knew from the original trilogy. Kind of like how Obi-Wan didn't hesitate to get involved after meeting Luke and getting the message from Leia. I mean, a lot of people give Mark Hamill crap for saying that Luke wouldn't go off and hide, and they go, well, that's what Yoda and Obi-Wan did. That's true. You could make that point. But the thing is, as soon as someone came to meet Obi-Wan and Yoda, they immediately got on board with training and working with them. Yoda only screwed around with Luke for a very little amount of time, and Obi-Wan really didn't waste any of Luke's time. They get involved with the mission and become Jedis again. They don't hesitate. That's what Mark Hamill was saying. Okay, a Jedi doesn't give up, and he's not wrong. Those Jedi didn't give up. Yoda ultimately doesn't give up. Obi-Wan ultimately doesn't give up. They're just old and past their prime, and they weren't able to fight this big military anymore. They weren't able to fight the Emperor, you know? Now, Lucas handled those sequences really poorly in the prequels, but you still have to go with that there wasn't much of an option for them. Luke, on the other hand, why did he just leave because of the Kylo thing? It doesn't make as much sense. It's not like the galaxy got taken over right away like they did in the prequels. When we go into the events of Force Awakens, the First Order's fighting the Resistance, and it seems like the Resistance is in charge or something. I don't know what they're resisting. Aren't they the Republic? Isn't Leia part of the Republic? They won at the end of Return of the Jedi. The continuity again. And use your imagination. Make up what happened in those 30 years. Well, all I'm asking for is just little lines of dialogue that would explain it and would make this feel like a better sequel series to the original trilogy. The original trilogy didn't need to explain a lot of that stuff because it was its own thing. It wasn't following anything, so you could accept that this was how the universe was. But these new films are trying to get you to do that while also wanting you to look at them as sequels. So it's a constant contradiction between themselves, just like this film. It's a conflict, the lightsaber being pulled. What we got is somewhere in the middle, right? We got somewhere kind of in the middle. A Luke that has given up and doesn't even want to be in the movie. Now, sure, the movie still ends with Luke versus Kylo, the cliche outcome that Johnson seemed to be avoiding. Luke dies, just not in totally the sacrificial way we thought. His Force Wi-Fi is very fast, and he projects himself to the final confrontation. The X-Wing we see in the water isn't used, because Johnson loves subverting your expectations. Luke doesn't fly in his X-Wing to save Finn last minute. No, it's Rose crashing into him and saying, we have to save the ones we love. We get the twin sunset as a callback to New Hope. This moment feels less organic than the original when Luke looks out. Seeing the two suns just felt like part of that world, and it works because the moment's not set up and cheesy. It just happens. And in this movie, it comes off obvious for what the movie's going for, especially. Johnson does want to give you what you want. It's just the way of getting there that's going to be unique. Well, kudos to you, Mr. Johnson. You took a once great character and made him a boring hermit that is used as little more than a plot device for the final shot of your movie. You took someone that inspired us and made him a loser, someone who is a failure, and wasted his time even fighting the Empire. Maybe in retrospect, the galaxy would have been better off if Luke joined Vader. They could have brought balance and maybe ended that child slavery issue that nobody seems to care about. I mean, if Luke did all that for it to end up here, it sure does make the original trilogy feel kind of pointless. Snoke just shows up and ruins everything. Leia and the Resistance have failed and did a horrible job over the last 30 years. They clearly have terrible military strategy, and they haven't been able to do anything about the Starkiller base being built or the war profiteering going on Canto Bight. Leia apparently has no hold over the galaxy at all. I mean, maybe Kylo was right. Maybe they should have killed Leia at the end. Maybe Poe and everyone should have died. Maybe Rey should have just joined up with Kylo and started their own thing. I mean, what's the argument to fight for the Resistance? Why would anyone want to stand up for the Resistance? What do they represent? All they are is a bunch of failures. What, you want to join the loser group? Okay. Because that's really what they are. They're just losers. And yet, the movie wants you to be invested and be excited at the end by the spark of the Resistance with the little boy. But how could he even be inspired? Inspired by a bunch of losers? And I know, oh, he's inspired by Luke Skywalker. He's inspired by The Last Stand. But even that's done in kind of a less dramatically pleasing way. Instead of Luke actually going there and dying in a very satisfying sequence, maybe he does disappear like the Obi-Wan cloak. Him not being there just kind of takes the weight away from it and the emotional impact to connect these scenes. Or at least it did for me. I mean, what's the point of watching the original trilogy anymore if we know they're going to fail? Why do I care about these people if I know they're just going to fail? Last time I rooted for a bunch of rebels, they lost. Snoke was able to build a new Death Star and get an army large enough to wipe out the entire Resistance at the beginning of this movie. And nobody in the galaxy cares that he blew up 5 planets. Just nobody. Nobody seems to care about this. Nope. The evil, rich, white people in the casino planet love to sell weapons and make money off war. Who needs characters when you have brilliant subtext? Who needs a story when it's easier to write a contrived screenplay? Who needs Luke Skywalker? The movie ends as a young boy looks into the stars with hopes and dreams. I look at the screen with the feeling of indifference, a coldness that I thought wasn't possible. There's an idea of a Luke Skywalker, some kind of abstraction, but there is no real Jedi, only an old man in a bathrobe, an illusion. And though he can hide his cold gaze and hold his lightsaber with a tight grip, and maybe you can even sense the Force in him, he is simply not there.
Hello, baby, hello. Haven't seen your face for a while. Have you quit doing time for me? Are you still the same spoiled child? Hello, I said hello. This the only place you thought to go? Am I the only man you ever had? Am I just the last surviving friend? You know, Harmony and me, pretty good company. Looking for an island in our boat upon the sea. Harmony, gee, I really love you and I wanna love you forever. Dream of never, ever, ever leaving Harmony. Hello, baby, hello. Open up your heart and let your feelings flow. You're not unlucky, knowing me, keeping the speed real slow. In any case, I set my own pace, but still on the show. Say hello.